My name is Grim Harvest, and welcome back to another Halloween Wednesday. Now, for those who don't know what Halloween Wednesday is, I will play the clip right here for you, because I am not going to explain this myself.
Now, for those who don't know what Halloween Wednesday is, Halloween Wednesday is where every Wednesday we all will come together and do everything related to Halloween. Rather it be watching scary videos, listening to scary music. Heck, they don't even need to be scary, just related to Halloween. And if you all have anything you want us to look at, just go to Rewatch's X accounts and tell us in the comments what you want us to see. Now enough talk. Everyone, get your Halloween candy and enjoy.
Great, now that you all know what Halloween Wednesday is, I'm sure you'll all be happy to know that I came back with I Rewrote Jeff the Killer by YouTuber Pastra, who has this creepy Jeff the Killer logo that I just realized. Anyway, we are on Chapter 4 with Ashley Carter. Today I think we'll do Chapter 4 through 6, and we'll call it a day. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Ashley Carter.
My name is Ashley Carter. I was born and raised in Carpenter's Landing, unfortunately.
Wait, is this a guy? I kind of thought this was a girl.
Life wasn't exactly easy for me growing up. My older brother was a deadbeat, and my parents both ended up leaving us at some point when I was still young. So I had to spend the better part of my life putting up with that day by day. I tried not to let those experiences bring me down a similar path though, you know? I saw what it brought my brother to, and I wanted to be better. That was why instead of getting into drugs and alcohol like every other person who lives here, I tried to make the best of my situation.
Good for you,
I did well in
friend.
school, saved what little money I had, and I have been studying law at Tremblay Community College for the last couple years now. If all goes well, I'll be out of this town as soon as I graduate. All that to say, my story actually started at my college campus. I was up late one night working on a project. I was studying the Woods family homicide that happened a couple years back and completely lost track of time. The sun was setting by the time I'd noticed how long I was there. Looking at the time, I figured I'd worked hard enough and could make my way home to spend the rest of the night relaxing. I lived close to campus, only about 10 minutes away at the longest, so usually I just chose to walk instead of taking the bus or driving. That night was no different. I must have been halfway to my house by the time the streetlights began turning on one by one around me. Each of them flickered to life pathetically, with some of them glowing dully and others burning out completely as I passed them by. It was as these lights began to illuminate the streets that I noticed him following me. This guy in a white hoodie who walked on the sidewalk parallel to me. I didn't see him until one of the lights above revealed him walking in equal pace to mine. At first, I didn't pay him any mind. I saw plenty of guys like him on my walks home, and some of them had even approached me before asking for things like spare change. That was why I wasn't as alarmed as I should have been when he began to make his way to my side of the sidewalk. I saw him take a sharp turn onto the middle of the street, keeping his hands in his pockets and his head low. With the closer look I now had at the guy, I could see he was also wearing a white medical mask over his face that concealed most of his features.
Medical mask.
I was a bit worried by his quick approach, but rather than running or making a scene, I simply called out to him. "Hey, can I help you, man?" I shouted. The words caused him to freeze up completely, like a deer in headlights. He stood there in the middle of the street for a few seconds, until slowly tilting his head up to meet my gaze. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. I couldn't tell if he looked high or completely insane. The moment we made eye contact, his demeanor shifted into something completely different. Instead of quickly approaching like before, He now slowly and methodically advanced toward me with his entire body hunched over. With each step, he put all of his weight
That
onto
means
one of his feet,
walk away.
and the entire time, he never broke eye contact with me. Anytime I would step back or move suddenly in any way, he would freeze up momentarily and begin sizing me up.
Freeze up. It's like he's ready to start running if you end up... It's like if you end up turning around, running away, Jeff is going to stop and run after you. That is just scary.
Predator stalking its prey. At this point, I was thoroughly freaked out. I didn't know what the guy wanted, and nobody was out there that night that could see what was going on. I started weighing my options. I worried that if I stayed there, he would try to mug me or something.
He's
But
not
I
here to
also
mug
feared
you.
that if I suddenly ran away, he would give chase.
Mhm.
You may think I am an idiot for deciding to do so. But in the moment, I just decided to stand my ground and find out what this guy wanted from me. He continued his slow...
A part of me kind of thinks you are an idiot for that, but another part of me believes that's probably the only option you have because, well, he'll do exactly what you just said. He'll give chase. There's pretty much nothing you can do.
animal-like advances until he was standing about 3 feet from me, still remaining in the middle of the road. With how close he was, I could catch the scent of something burnt coming off of him, like scorched hair and oil. It was foul and almost made me gag. I tried stepping back from him, folding my arms and trying to keep my distance. He stared at me like a curious child, tilting his head and eyeing me up with those wide, bloodshot eyes. I went to speak to him again, but he cut me off as he spoke in a low, raspy whisper.
I finally found you.
Why do you want to find me so much? And also the real question, why does Jeff sound like that? Pastor, I'm sorry, but Jeff sounds like he's a dying old lady. I'm sorry.
He murmured. There was this shaky excitement in his tone that freaked me out even more than I already was.
Run.
What are you talking about?
That's all
I don't
can
know
tell
you, man,
Run.
I responded, taking another step away from him. I had never seen this guy in my entire life. To this day, I have no idea what he was talking about, but he persisted and seemed almost offended by what I'd said to him.
Yes, you do. How could you not recognize me?
Was it Ashley Carter? So, I remember in the old Jeff the Killer creepypasta, Jeff used to be bullied. So, is Ashley Carter one of the bullies? I mean, he wasn't in the old creepypasta, but he probably is for this new rewrite. So, I wouldn't be surprised.
Is it because of the mask?
He continued to whisper, his voice trembling. As he spoke, he pulled one of his dirty hands from his pocket and removed the medical mask covering his face. I gagged at the sight of him. His face was pale and covered in thick, yellow blisters that went along his cheeks and mouth, which was contorted into an uncomfortable red smile. Yellow, crooked teeth lined his sore-ridden mouth, and I could see bits of blood running from his gums all the way down to his lip and chin. He had long, black, greasy hair which ran down to his shoulders and partially over his face, now obscuring his large, bloodshot eyes. He looked like someone had splashed his face with acid. When he saw my
wasn't
visceral
acid.
reaction to his face, that bloody smile of his somehow grew wider, now stretching ear to ear.
You mean like it's actually touching his ears, right? Because I kind of feel like that's what this art is about.
It looked so painful. I continued to walk backwards, raising my hands in front of me to keep the distance between us. I could barely speak when I choked the words, "Stay back," out of my mouth. He let out this small, childish giggle, as if he enjoyed every second of our encounter.
Oh, come on now. That's no way to look at your brother. What would Mom and Dad think?
Brother. Wait. Brother. So does that mean Jeff's name is Jeff Carter now? That's kind of an embarrassing name. But that also means that Lou, yeah, Jeff's brother's name used to be Lou. Lou's name's Ashley Carter. Who's going to tell him that he has a girl's name?
He asked me, his voice now raising as he began advancing towards me again with that same hunched posture. I had no idea what he was talking about. This man was not my brother. I had never seen him before. Before I had time to question him about this, though, he pulled his other hand from his sweater pocket, revealing a used hunting knife that was covered in dried, crusty blood.
Well, at least he's upgraded from a kitchen knife to a hunting knife. I'm sorry, I'll stop now.
He raised it toward me, tilting his head with that same childlike demeanor he'd previously shown. But before he could swing it at me, I turned and ran down the street faster than I had ever run in my life. I could hear him give chase behind me, gaining on me as I bolted down the road. I screamed for help, but nobody came, just as I'd feared. I was alone out there while that maniac hunted me down. The one thing that kept me going, aside from the adrenaline pumping through my veins, was the promise that I could get to my house if I just kept running. It was close by. I knew the route, and it was only a couple of minutes away when walking. If I just kept going at the pace I was, I would make it before he caught up to me. I continued to run, never once looking behind me.
Good.
My throat burned with a searing pain. I could feel my legs giving way, but I kept going until I arrived at my house. As I made my way up the steps of the front porch, I swung the door open, turning to look behind me, only to see nothing. He was completely gone. That didn't stop me from running into my house, slamming the door behind me and locking it as quickly as I could. Not long after, I called the police and reported the entire thing. I was told that they would look for the man who attacked me, but it didn't seem like anything had come from it. I never did see him again, but I have spent every single night after fearing that I will. I refuse to stay on campus during those late hours anymore, only ever leaving the community buses where I know large groups of people will be gathered. At night, I never feel safe anymore. Any small sound I may hear makes me jump out of my own skin. And I always see that hideous face staring back at me when I close my eyes to sleep at night. If the person you're looking for is the same guy who attacked me that night, I hope to God you catch him. Not just to stop these murders, but to give me some peace of mind. I don't want to spend every day of my life looking over my shoulder thinking some boogeyman is hiding in the dark.
I can understand that.
Samuel could see that Ashley was shaking when they finished their testimony. The poor kid was scared out of their mind even when recounting an old story. He tried to the best of his ability to give them some form of comfort, leaning forward on the table with his elbows as he spoke.
Ashley, I promise you my partner and I will find this man. You don't have to be afraid of him. I'll make sure of it,
he said solemnly. Ashley seemed to calm down upon hearing those words. The shaking stopped and they took a long, deep breath.
Thank you,
was all Ashley said in response as they pushed their chair out and left the room before Norman could even see them out. Ashley left the police department soon after, going out to the front desk just as the next witness stood from his chair. The man was tall and built. He had long, fluffy brown hair and very distinguished, chiseled features. As Ashley tried to pass him by, the man spoke to them.
You saw him too, right?
He said, grabbing Ashley's attention. Ashley turned to the man, staring up at him and meeting his eyes. Despite how large the man was, when Ashley looked into his eyes, they saw the same fear they'd felt, and knew they had both encountered the same boogeyman.
Yeah, I did.
Ashley muttered before catching themselves.
But they'll catch him. I know they will.
With that, Ashley turned and left the building, letting the man make his way to the interview room to give his own testimony.
Jonathan West.
Every year my wife, Sherry, and I made an effort to get out of town one way or another once the summer rolled around. Our trips were never anything extravagant, usually just heading one city over to visit some family or taking a short hike, but They were enough for the two of us. Life here was hard, and any excuse we had to get away from it all for a little bit was good enough for us. This year was no different. About a month back, we planned out this big hiking trip in a forest near town. We would hike along whatever path we could, taking in all the sights of nature, and then, when we were done, we'd set up camp for the night and just enjoy each other's company by the campfire. I remember how excited the two of us were when we finally made that drive. We were joking along with each other, Sherry excitedly pointing to everywhere she wanted to visit on this map that she brought along. All the while, the concrete pillars of Carpenter's Landing got smaller and
Yeah, I'm going to say this. I already think that Sherry is going to die. I'm sorry, but I kind of think that Sherry's going to die.
smaller in our rearview mirror. It was going to be perfect. At least that's what we thought. By the time we arrived at the forest clearing, the sun was already setting. We'd left late in the day, wanting to spend our first night relaxing far from the polluted air and bright lights that poisoned our lives day by day. A quiet night in the wilderness, holding each other close as the warmth of the fire flickered calmly. We parked our car close to the forest entrance, unpacking what felt like hundreds of supplies for every situation. My wife is a worrier. She would usually plan ahead for every possible issue we'd come across, no matter how small. I wasn't exactly complaining about it, but it certainly made that first night far more exhausting than we'd ever planned. We lugged our gear along a dirt path left behind for hikers like ourselves, making an effort to avoid any branches or shrubbery that would make us topple over and drop everything along the forest floor. Even with the path we took, the forest was dense. Large oak trees surrounded us every corner, with shrubs and other plant life huddled beneath.
Also, can I say this? What are these marks that he's drawing on Jeff's face? Are they supposed to represent burnt marks? Or is it supposed to show how his skin is just stretched? How his skin just looks like it's stretched. Like, I don't know, but...
them,
Someone tell me
making the
what
forest
these
a
mean.
nightmare to navigate without a map on hand. Combine that with the darkness that was quickly overtaking the woods, and we could barely make out where we were going. Only reason we found the clearing we were looking for was because Sherry lit the way with this large flashlight she brought, making sure to guide me as I did most of the heavy lifting with our gear. When we got to the clearing, I immediately got to work setting up this cheap little tent we bought, while my wife gathered wood and set up a fire for us. As soon as both of us were done with our tedious tasks, we both collapsed by the fire and just laid there for a while. If the story ended here, then I would have remembered it as being a perfect night. Sure, the trek was difficult, but it was well worth it to just have those few short moments of quiet, laying by the fire, staring up at the stars through the trees, holding the love of my life in my arms. But of
Yeah, you really are making me think that she is about to die.
course, it didn't stay that way for long. As the two of us laid there, enjoying the calm sounds of the fire, the silence was suddenly broken by a loud, shrill scream being heard deep within the forest. It was a single scream. It sounded like a young man. It echoed out loudly before the woods returned to that same silence we grew accustomed to in an instant. I remember Sherry and I just stared at each other for a moment in shock, clearly trying to make heads or tails of what we'd just heard. And then another scream shattered the quiet once more, this one sounding more strained and painful than before, until abruptly stopping just as quickly as it began. Silence once more. At this point, Sherry was freaking out in my arms, trembling and begging for us to leave.
Huh.
I tried to calm her down to no
No
avail
wonder why
when we
rewatched
heard
this like
another
going
sound.
camping.
This one closer than the screams ever were. The sound of soft footsteps closing in on our campsite. I wasted no time ushering Sherry into the tent the moment I heard the sound. We had no idea what was out there, and I wasn't about to find out standing out in the open. We sat in that tent in near perfect silence, my wife shaking in my arms and me trying my hardest to keep both of us calm. The footsteps grew nearer and nearer until they were right outside our tent.
Jeff.
And then they suddenly stopped. The fire outside illuminated the figure, casting its shadow over top the translucent tent and revealing to us what it was. A man. A tall man that looked to be wearing baggy clothes, now just standing outside the tent like a statue. I could hear him start mumbling something to himself out there, and his shadow began swaying back and forth. He stood out there for what felt like an eternity, whispering to nobody like he was in some kind of...
You know, I did actually believe that Jeff was insane. This is just proving to me that he needs to go to a mental asylum. I can understand talking to yourself, but he is whispering to himself and swaying in front of your tent. Never mind the fact that he's a serial killer. He is just acting like an insane person.
Of catatonic state. Eventually, I had enough of it. I rummaged around in our tent for some kind of weapon, settling on a hunting knife we'd brought. As I went to open the tent, Sherry grabbed at my shirt sleeve, mouthing the words no to me over and over.
Please,
But I assured her I would be okay, and slowly unzipped the tent to get a better look at the man outside. I peered my head out of the small entrance I created, just enough to be able to see him. He was facing away from our tent, staring deeply into the campfire as he continued his quiet rambling. He wore a large, baggy white hoodie and black cargo pants. The hoodie was filthy, covered in all kinds of dirt, grime, and, most strikingly, what looked like blood. The same blood could be seen running through his dark hair and all over his hands, which tightly clutched his shoulders as if he were cold. The light from the fire reflected off the bloodstains, creating a glare which told me it was fresh. My mind began to race with all the horrible implications of his appearance. What were those screams we heard? Did he kill someone before arriving here? Before I had long to think about it, I caught something the man said while transfixed by the fire. Something I could actually make out between the gibberish he was speaking in. He said in his raspy, shrill voice.
There's been a fire. Get Mom and Dad.
I had no idea what he was talking about, but
there's enough
hearing
fire.
him speak properly was
Get
enough to...
Mom and Dad. Yeah, Jeff is completely insane now. He is completely insane. He believes his parents are alive? When he probably killed them?
to snap me out of the confused state I was
I
in
don't know.
and step out of the tent, now holding the hunting knife in my right hand for him to see. "Hey!" I said to him sternly. "What the fuck do you want?" I tried to make myself as imposing as possible to this man despite my fear. I puffed out my chest and spoke as confidently as I could.
To all the brave gents out there, please don't be a hero. You might be brave, you might be strong, you might be Gaston, but please, don't be a hero. We all want you alive. I mean, maybe not some people, because they probably don't even know who you are. But I don't want you to die. So please, do not be a hero.
But even then it was
Unless
clear
you're
that the
a military
encounter had
soldier,
shaken me up.
then
When he heard my
by all
words,
means, be a
his head
hero.
suddenly snapped in my direction, making immediate eye contact with me. One look at his face was enough for all my fake bravado to shatter. He looked burnt. Badly burnt. His face was scarred and misshapen, with a large burn mark creeping up his cheek towards his left eye, which looked to be blind. At first glance,
So
it looked
he's blind in his left eye.
like half of a large, painful
I
smile.
guess to explain.
He was missing almost all of his
that.
hair on the left side of his head as well, with what was still there barely clinging to his scalp.
So, yeah, I guess that explains this. He really is blind to his left eye. And I guess I can understand what you mean by that giant burn mark.
In small black patches. The other side of his face would have looked fine by comparison, if not for the blood that covered it almost completely. I stepped back at the sight of him, my heart sinking to my stomach and my breaths becoming sporadic. The moment he saw me, a flash of recognition suddenly appeared on his face, breaking him free from the strange trance he was in.
Is that you?
He asked me in an excited voice.
I can't believe you're here. I finally found you.
As he said those words to me, he opened his arms and began to slowly walk towards me, his hands and arms still dripping with that.
Okay, so it's clear. Jeff is an insane person, and he believes that almost everybody that he sees is his brother. He believes that almost everyone he sees is Lou. Okay, so I was wrong. Whoever the heck Ashley isn't his brother. He just believes that everybody he sees is his brother. Or maybe his parents? I don't know. And And if you say that you're not any member of his family, he's gonna kill you.
Fresh, thick blood. I didn't know what he wanted or who he thought I was, but I wasn't having any of it. I took one step back and firmly planted my feet into the dirt, pointing the hunting knife at him as I shouted, "Get the hell away from me, you freak! You take one step closer and I'll kill you!" That time, I meant it. I was not about to let this guy get anywhere close to me or my wife, no matter how scared I was. The moment he heard those words, something about his demeanor changed. He looked shocked, his eyes going wide and bloodshot and his arms slowly lowering.
How could you say that to me?
He whispered, tears beginning to roll down his face. That's when
Oh
I
god, he is insane.
saw him reach into his pocket and pull out an old box cutter covered in the same blood as his hands and sweater.
Box cutter? How many weapons do you have? I thought you just had a basic kitchen knife, but no, he's armed with a box cutter. You know what would have been hilarious and also kind of dumb, but also very funny and very weird? It would be if Pastra decided, you know what would have been cool? Let's give Jeff a handgun. That for some reason appeared in my head. Like, let's get Pastra, I can't speak. Let's get Jeff a handgun. Isn't that fun?
He suddenly hunched forward and lunged at me faster than I ever could have expected from a man his size. He tackled me to the ground, raising the box cutter above his head and preparing to swing down at me.
Wow,
In
that's
that
right.
instant, I acted fast, stabbing him in the side of the torso with the hunting knife and kicking him off of me as he screamed in pain. He barreled backwards into the campfire, his hoodie catching on fire as he tried to regain his composure. I screamed for Sherry to run, and soon after, her and I were bolting through the dark forest together, tripping over branches and shrubbery, but continuing forward regardless. That moment, running through the dark of the woods, knowing that maniac may be trailing behind us, was the most scared I've ever been in my entire life. My mind was racing, my eyes darted in every direction, mistaking the shapes of the oak trees around us for that man. It felt like a miracle when we saw the moonlight
Oh
piercing.
goodness, this actually looks creepy. It looks creepy. My dude's face blends in completely with his hair. The only thing that needs work is his hoodie, which, I mean, well, he's going to work on the hoodie, but still. This just looks like Jeff if he was wearing a basic sweater. But still, this guy looks scary.
Passing through the trees, revealing the forest exit to us. We got to our car, and I frantically rummaged through my pockets trying to get my hands on the keys. I constantly checked behind myself, making sure he didn't follow us. The man was nowhere to be seen. When I got my hands on the keys, I opened the doors to our car, and next thing you know, my wife and I floored it out of there. I remember that ride home so vividly. The sobbing, the arguing about what to do next, the questioning about who that man was and what he wanted. It was the worst night of my entire life. After we got home, I called the cops and reported the whole thing. I remember I was told that they'd check the forest out to try and find any bodies, but I don't think anything came of it. Ever since then, things have been different between my wife and I. I've tried to help her work through what we experienced, but she's become so paranoid ever since that she barely even wants to leave the house.
Deal? Well, first off, this seems to be a regular occurrence with Jeff here. Compared to most killers I've heard of, Jeff is... he's something. To the point that he can make you extremely paranoid. He can make you extremely paranoid just by being there. Which, makes sense, but still. But I guess I was wrong. Sherry didn't die. Even though it kind of felt like she did.
It's gotten especially bad now that word has gotten out about the ghost stalker or whatever else people are calling him. She is absolutely convinced the guy we saw that night and the killer you're looking for are the same guy.
Now, I also advise moving. Please.
That's why I'm here. I hope that by telling you this, maybe you'll be able to piece things together and catch him. I want that more than anything. For the victims, and so Sherry doesn't have to be afraid to leave the house anymore. I just want to see her happy again.
As Jonathan finished giving his account, tears ran down his face and his head hung low.
Oh, man.
Norman glanced over at his partner, clearly unequipped to deal with this kind of situation. Samuel caught his glance, taking in a deep breath before saying,
Don't worry, Jonathan. We will catch him, no matter what. I promise you, we will.
Jonathan lifted his head to look at Samuel, sniffling and saying,
Thank you.
before standing up and getting ready to leave.
Will that be all? I gotta make sure I get home before Sherry starts to worry.
He asked, pointing to the door. Samuel and Norman both nodded, and Jonathan left with newfound hope that the man who attacked him and his wife that night would be brought to justice.
Will he? Because honestly, I don't think so. Norman Keller. And then afterwards, we'll end this right here.
With all the witnesses having provided their testimonies, Norman and Samuel were left in the interview room to stew over everything they were told. The accounts of each witness only left them with more questions about their killer than when they began. Samuel sat at the table, his head resting in his hands as he pondered every possibility. Meanwhile, Norman paced back and forth, talking out loud to himself, much to his partner's dismay.
So we can at least agree they all encountered the same guy, right? I mean, the descriptions were a bit off, but they were close enough that there was no way this wasn't the same guy, right?
Norman asked, taking a brief pause from his pacing and turning to Samuel for reassurance. Samuel simply let out an affirmative grunt, nodding his head slowly.
Stories had a lot more in common than just his appearance, too.
Samuel added, now resting his hands on the table and leaning back in his chair.
This stalker behaves just like our killer does. Follows his victims at night, chooses them wisely too, it seems.
Before Samuel could finish his sentence, Norman cut him off, thinking aloud once more.
Yeah, what is up with that? Guy acted like those last two witnesses were part of his family or something, and he clearly wasn't just toying with them either. No, he really believed it from the way they explained it.
Norman began making large gestures with his hands as if trying to paint a picture in the air to illustrate his point and failing.
Insanity.
I noticed that too. Makes the patterns with his victims make more sense when we look at it that way. Perhaps he is looking for one specific person he can't find. Someone who matches the victim's descriptions that he could mistaken them for.
I think he's
A
looking
family
for Blue.
member or a close friend.
Samuel continued, now sharing his thoughts more closely with his partner as they worked things out.
And what about all that mention of fire? First two guys said he reeked of oil or burnt cigarettes or whatever, and the third guy mentioned that fire. What is that guy's deal with?
Before Norman could finish his thought, he suddenly paused, a flash of recognition appearing on his face as his eyes widened.
Hold on, wait a minute.
Samuel stared at his partner confused, raising one of his eyebrows as he waited with bated breath to hear him continue. He gestured towards him, twirling his hands as he said,
Well, come on now, spit it out.
What was it that Ashley person said they were studying at the Tremblay Community College?
Norman said quickly, pointing at his partner and waiting for him to answer like he was on some kind of bizarre game show. Samuel pondered it for a moment, playing out the story in his mind again before he remembered, chiming in.
The Woods family homicide? Why does that matter?
Samuel folded his arms, confused but willing to hear out whatever it was Norman would say.
Okay, so I remember a few years back when that murder happened. It was treated like a big deal back here at the station. I didn't get to investigate it or nothing since I was new, but a lot of the other guys around here let me in on some of the little details of it.
Norman explained, beginning to walk in circles as he explained, keeping eye contact with the floor.
Apparently some kid named Jeffrey and his family moved to Carpenter's Landing after...
Bringing in some old lore. I like it.
this big fire at their old place. This Jeffrey kid was bad news, Sam, a real black sheep in the family. I was told he completely snapped after being bullied by a couple of kids and tried to kill his whole family.
Samuel never spoke up, letting his partner explain. He normally hated it when Norman went on these massive tangents, but for once he really felt like he was going somewhere. He could tell from the confidence in his partner's voice.
Either way, long story short, Jeffrey ended up killing his mom, but his younger brother, Lou, ended up getting away. By the
I thought Lou was his older brother.
time police arrived, they found gasoline cans in Jeff's closet, but he was nowhere to be seen. They looked for him for a while, but it was like he vanished completely.
Norman suddenly stopped in his
Gasoline
tracks,
can.
waiting for Samuel's thought.
So you're just dunking gasoline on your body? Is my new dad addicted to gasoline because he was burnt alive by those bullies?
So let me get this straight. You think that...
Samuel tried to humor his partner, but paid the price as he was interrupted once more.
That Jeffrey Woods might be our guy, and he wants to finish the job by finding and killing his brother once and for all.
Norman held his head high as the words came out of his mouth. Samuel had never seen him so proud.
I appreciate your enthusiasm, Norman. But how can we be sure? I mean, you're assuming a lot here.
Samuel said, trying not to burst his partner's bubble completely while also being the more realistic of the two.
Oh, come on, don't give me that, Sam. Think about it. The obsession with family, the burning smell, the fire, it all adds up too well. If our guy really is Jeffrey Woods, we'd be catching the ghost stalker and we'd be solving a cold case. It'd be 2 birds with 1 stone.
Norman was trying now more than ever to convince Samuel of his logic. He had no proof yet, only vague theories, but deep down he knew he was onto something with this. Samuel could see that, and despite his skepticism, he relented.
Fine, I'll play along. I'll do some digging on this and see what I can find out about it.
Samuel responded, a light smile across his face as he folded his arms. He could see the joy on Norman's face when he agreed. This was the first time that Norman did most of the heavy lifting in a case like this, and Samuel could tell that he was living for every second of it.
Okay, this might be weird and very off topic, but is it kind of crazy that I want to see what happens if Pastra decided to, make, rewrites of all these other Jeff the Killer copies, like Jane the Killer, Homicidal Lou, and I think even some Jeff the Killer fan-made happy pastas. If you don't know what a happy pasta is, think of a creepy pasta, except instead of killing people, their main goal is to spread joy and happiness. Basically, what would happen if he did something like that with Jeff the Hugger or Jenny Smiles? I just thought it was funny. Oh, and then before you say anything, yeah, happy pastas have a dark side to them too. They can pretty much do anything messed up. You can pretty much do anything messed up if you get them mad. So, yeah.
Alrighty then. I'll start doing some research myself then, see what I can find.
Norman said excitedly, and the two left the room to begin their own respective detective work. A few hours passed at the station, with Norman conducting his own research on one of the 6 communal computers left at the office for times like this. He was completely absorbed in his work, typing away and looking into every document he could find pertaining to the Woods family homicide, when he suddenly felt a tap on his shoulder. He quickly turned around to see Samuel standing next to him, a large file in his hand.
So I did some digging like you asked.
Samuel said, placing the file on the desk next to Norman.
And I think you're gonna like what I found.
Samuel gestured to the file, nodding his head as if he waited for Norman to open it. Norman excitedly flipped the file open, instantly being greeted to something that gave him all the confirmation he needed about his theory. A photo of Lou Woods. The boy looked to be in about his 20s. He had long brown hair that went down to his shoulders and sported a pair of square glasses over top his large brown eyes.
Alright,
Sam, he looks just like him. I told you I was onto something.
Norman looked up at Samuel, expecting another one of his remarks, but only saw his partner staring down at him, arms folded with a large grin across his face.
You sure did. Good work, kid. This is the best leave we've had yet. I
Great
did some
job,
extra digging
kid.
on this Lou kid. Turns out, after the murders took place, he went to live with his aunt for a while. He moved into an apartment in town once he was old enough for it. I've got an address.
Samuel said, the smile he had never fading from his face. It wasn't often that Norman saw his partner so proud of his deductive skills. It made him more excited about the revelation than he ever was before.
Well, what the hell are we waiting for then?
Norman replied in a hurry, grabbing his coat and putting it on clumsily as he stepped out the door to their car. Samuel followed slowly behind, letting out a chuckle and shaking his head at his partner's excitement. As the two of them stepped into their car, they noticed that the rain outside was finally coming to a stop after hours of relentlessly flooding the streets. The water now weakly ran down the pavement, finding its way into whatever pothole it could and draining away to nothing in small whirlpools. The car ride passed in an excited quiet, with the two officers believing themselves to have found a lead that would bring them one step closer to stopping the killings of the ghost stalker once and for all. The car ride eventually came to a stop as they arrived at their destination, a large apartment complex located on Great Mandy Street. The apartment was like most other buildings the two had seen in Carpenter's Landing, a great pillar of old, worn stone that tried its hardest to imitate the comfortable living spaces seen in other cities. Graffiti lined the walls at the side of the building, depicting many colorful pieces of imagery that starkly contrasted the deep grays that made up the entire town. The two officers stepped out of their vehicle quietly, staring up at the building as Samuel pulled out a note he left for himself to remember which room they were going to. And so, they walked together to the apartment complex, ready to talk with the person who may bring them one step closer to catching their killer.
Chapter 7 will be Lou Woods. So that is where we're going to end it off today. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and let me know if you are ready for the next Halloween Wednesday, where we hear the tale of Lou Woods, and then the rest of Chapter 8. And my battery is about to run out, so, yeah. I hope you all enjoyed, and remember, Happy Halloween Wednesday!